Mommy, why did I get a cavity? Why?
I gotta take a break.
Some boys kiss me, some boys hug me. I think they're okay. If they don't give me proper credit, I just walk away. They can beg and they can plead, but they don't see the light. 'Cause a boy with a cold hard cash is always Mr. Right. 'Cause we are living in a material world, and I am a material girl. You know that we are living in a material world, and I am a material girl.
Welcome back to our series on the 7 deadly sins. Today we look at the sin of greed. And on one level, this seems to be pretty easy because we know what greed looks like. We all have these different images that jump into our mind. For some of us, we think of Gordon Gekko from the movie Wall Street, proclaiming greed is good, with his slick back hair and his fancy suit. For some of us of a certain generation, we think of Scrooge McDuck jumping into his big piles of gold. So unlike some of the other deadly sins, we already know what greed is, but today what we want to explore is the real power of greed. And perhaps the best example of what this looks like comes to us from the Gospel of Luke, where Jesus encounters this rich ruler who comes to him asking a simple question. Rabbi, he asks, what must I do to inherit eternal life? Immediately Jesus says, you know the commandments. Before Jesus can say any more, the man says, oh, I've done that. I've kept all of those since my youth, which seems unlikely. I mean, Jesus said, do not bear false witness. The man has never told a lie. He's never embellished a story. Jesus quoted the commandment, honor your mother and father. As a father myself, it seems unlikely that this man went through his entire teenage years with never once rolling his eyes at his parents. Again, it doesn't seem likely that he's telling the truth. But instead of calling on him on this, instead of Jesus correcting him, Jesus says, okay, that's fine. Then there's just one more thing. If you want to inherit eternal life, there's one more thing you must do. Immediately the rich ruler stands up, puffs his chest out. He's excited. For someone who has kept all of the commandments, at least in his eyes, since his youth, the idea of doing one more thing, that's hardly a challenge. What is it, Jesus? What is the one more thing I must do to inherit eternal life? Jesus says, take all your possessions, sell them, give the money to the poor, then come and follow me. And Luke tells us the man walks away filled with sadness. Now, why that reaction? I mean, it'd be one thing if he was frustrated with Jesus. It would be another thing if he was angry because the commandment that Jesus tells him to do is just too difficult. But why is he filled with sadness? The answer lies in that initial question. When he says, Rabbi, what must I do to inherit eternal life? My hunch is, when we hear those words, we think the man is asking about heaven. How when he passes away, he can enter into those pearly gates and walk on the streets of gold. That's actually not what he is asking Jesus about in this moment. He is asking Jesus about eternal life, which in the Gospel of Luke is a life free from the power and fear of death. It includes, to be sure, this promise of eternal life, but when or what we think of as heaven, but when he's asking about it, at least in Luke's gospel, it is something that affects one now. It's what gives someone a sense of peace, a sense of purpose, a sense of comfort, that they're on the right track in life. That's what the man is looking for. When he says, Rabbi, what must I do to inherit eternal life? What must I do to have that sense of purpose, that sense of peace, that sense that I'm doing the right thing now? What's the next thing I need to do? This is a man, remember, who has done everything right, at least according to the ancient world's understanding of what was right. If you want to be successful, if you want to find peace, acquire more land. Build up your reserves of gold. Have more money in your bank account. Have more stuff. That's how you find peace. That's how you find comfort. That's how you know you're on the right track. When Jesus says to him, sell everything, give it away because none of that matters, the reason why he is sad is not because Jesus has told him something that's too difficult to do. The reason why he is sad is because he realizes in that moment that all the things he's looking for, that peace, that sense of assurance, that sense of comfort that he's on the right track, everything he's done throughout his life to achieve those very things has been a waste of time. Friends, that's the real power of greed. Greed has the capacity not just to turn us in on ourselves and to make us selfish people. We probably could have guessed that. The real power of greed, if it is allowed to grow, is that it causes us to waste our time on things that do not matter. And greed starts by whispering to us things that may be actually true. This is how greed works. Greed says to you, you're getting ready to go to a family wedding. Greed says, wouldn't it be good if you showed up with a shirt and tie, maybe a new dress? You need to look a little bit better, and so you do. Or maybe greed says to you, you know what? You're just scraping by right now. Rent is coming up. Wouldn't life be better if you had a few $100s more in the checking account? And it is, to be sure. Greed says to you, you know what? You deserve a vacation. You deserve a getaway with family members to go do something fun. You work hard. And it is. All of those things are good things. The gathering with family for a special occasion, wearing something where you don't feel like you're standing out, going on a family vacation, having a place for your family members to gather together where you're safe and you're warm, certainly during the winter. All of those things are good. But here's where greed works. It takes those simple things in life, and it always says they're not enough. Because the moment you say, yeah, I'm going to pick up a new shirt, new tie, what does greed say? Well, everybody else is going to show up in a brand new suit. Or greed says, you know what? How can you be content just paying your rent when your neighbor down the road has a brand new truck? How in the world are you? You need to do more. You need to earn more. You need to be more like him. Or greed says, really? You're taking your family to the Wisconsin Dells for 3 or 4 days? You do know that the person across town who's your age is taking their family to Europe or to Hawaii or someone else for 2 weeks. No, you need more. In order to be happy, you need more. That's greed's answer to everything. And eventually what greed does is it convinces us that it's about those things. So it's no longer about having that warm place to gather in the winter that is safe, that we're with our family. Now it is actually about the place. It's having the right apartment. It's about having the right house, or it's having the right vehicle. You see how that works? It's no longer about the family gathering where you're gathering with people you haven't seen in a long time. Now it's about what you're going to wear to that. It's no longer about spending precious time with family members after working hard and so you're able to go on a vacation. Now it's actually about the destination itself. Greed turns our focus first to ourselves, but ultimately to things that do not matter in life so that we miss out on the things that do. There's only one antidote to the power of greed as far as I know, and that is a spirit of thanksgiving. It is giving thanks in all things in life, that when life is going easy and life is a struggle, to be able to find the blessings from God in all of those situations. I've seen how this works. In fact, I saw it very closely a long, long time ago, when in the span of a week, I officiated at 2 very different funerals. The first one was for a person that I did not know exceedingly well. Near the late stages of his life, I was introduced to him. He sat down with me and he told me his story. And in so many ways, it was like this American success story. He had grown up very poor. He had decided at an early age he was going to make something of himself. And so his entire life, he strived to be successful. He did all the things that the world told him. If you want to be successful, if you want to be somebody, if you want to be important, this is what you do. And by the time the man passed away, he was insanely rich, to be quite honest. When it came time to celebrate his life, all of these colleagues of his all told stories about what a hard worker he was, how smart he was, how he always can anticipate what was happening in markets, and how incredibly successful he was. And yet, 24 hours after he had passed away, 24 hours after the funeral, I was served with my very first summons. I was being called to court. Turns out his family was already suing one another. Again, 24 hours after they had laid their father and their grandfather in the ground, this family was going to war over his estate. The same kids who told stories about what a wonderful and hard worker Dad was, but in the midst of those stories, they described how every night when they gathered at the kitchen table, Mom would set a plate out for Dad and he never ate it because he was never there. He would always come home and eat later. The same grandkids who would never call when their grandfather was dying told me stories about how grandfather was so successful. Oh, sure, they wish he had been able to keep his promise to attend at least a band concert or a summer league baseball game or something like that. But they understood he was busy working long after he needed to be. I have to think that if this man knew how this was all going to end, he would have made some different choices along the way. Rather than to spend his 80-some years in this world trying to acquire more stuff, he would have paid more attention to things that really, really matter. Meanwhile, later on in that week, I gathered with the community of faith and we said goodbye to a longtime member of the congregation. This was a service that was beautiful. Nobody stood up and talked about how successful she was. Nobody wrote magazine articles. She wasn't on the cover of the paper. This was a woman who in many ways had lived a very simple life. She had worked hard. She had loved her family. She had volunteered at local opportunities. But the big thing people talked about her, both before the service, during the service, and after the service, is how this woman gave thanks in all situations. That was my experience with her as well. In all things, she gave thanks for the blessings that she found in life, the blessings God had given her. And to be clear, this woman at times had some serious struggles. But when she looked back at those times in her life when she was struggling, those times in her life where she didn't have much, she talked about what a blessing that was, how formative it was for later in life. When she had lost people that were near and dear to her, when she told those stories, she was sad to be sure, but she also talked about what a blessing it was to have those people in her life and the lessons that they had taught her. In all things, she managed to give thanks. So when she died, her family was there. Her kids and her grandkids were there along with me singing an off-key version of Amazing Grace. And her husband, as he had done for months, was holding her hand, wiping her brow, saying over and over again, I love you, and giving thanks for their marriage. When we said goodbye to her, it was a celebration of someone who had spent their life focused on things that do in fact matter. People of God, those are two very different lives, two very different tracks in life one can take. What greed would tell you is that the life of the first man is the life worth emulating. We know better. It is a life of thanksgiving, of giving thanks in all things, of loving the people around us, focusing on the things that matter. That's the life worth living. So now we invite you to turn to your neighbors and to talk about the distractions in life that come from greed, the ways in which greed wants to pull your attention away from the things that matter, and more importantly, where are the places in life you want to give most thanks for this day? Thanks for joining us.
You know that we are living in a material world, and I am a material girl. A material world.